Yeah, so I started fundraise
Yeah.
the very day Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt. And
Crazy.
so then
Good,
I
good
did.
timing, Guda.
Yeah,
Great
I always
timing.
have the best timing.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. Bootstrapping and raising venture capital are two different things entirely, both with their pros and cons. With bootstrapping, you have more control over your company, but you can't scale as fast. With venture capital, you can scale a company 2 to 3 times as fast, maybe even more, but you have less control over your capital and your company. But there is one thing both have in common. They require a leap of faith. Today's guest is pretty unique. She's someone who's gotten to experience both types of companies, both bootstrapped and venture-backed. That guest is Guta Tolmasquim, founder and CEO of Purple Metrics, which recently closed their first institutional round of capital, a $1.2 million pre-seed led by Astella, one of the top venture capital firms in Brazil. But before Purple Metrics, Guta founded Brand Gym, a company she bootstrapped and built all by herself. As you can imagine, the transition to building a venture-backed company was interesting. But before we get into the details, I was curious to learn about little Guta and see if there were any hints of entrepreneurship hidden in her childhood.
Okay, so I was always super nerdy in terms of studying and reading. So always had my nose into a book. Uh, and I was super into school. I loved it, loved studying. So the typical nerd stereotype. Um, wasn't super good at sports, those kind of things. But I was always very good in math, which is not very common
Hmm.
for a kid to be into it. And so then my parents started stimulating the creative side of like, my brain. So I would love to color and I would make games. So board game. I wanted to like be a board game designer when I grew up. Uh, so I remember these two sides of storytelling, creativity, and the logical part of like liking to do homework uh, with numbers and stuff like that. And those are
Yeah,
funny enough the base of Purple Matrix because it's metrics for creativity and branding. So it's always been there.
It's a really interesting background. I always tell people, so like my background is in science and computer science and
Hmm.
grew up just, doing math competitions and the nerdiest things possible too. And I studied computer science in college and I always tell people if I were to do it again, I'd want to study design and
Hmm.
computer science. Like I'd want to balance the two because I feel like I didn't get all that exposure, but you did as a little kid. Um, what about on your personality side of things in terms of were you naturally outgoing as a little kid or were you the stereotypical
Hmm.
bookworm reading books, not like yeah, not being comfortable around other kids?
Um, I think I always had this leadership in me. So I would organize my cousins into a secret cousin club, like stuff like that. And uh, but I wasn't very popular at school until I was like 15 or 14. So I was more not a lot of a bunch of friends, but I wouldn't be the one like in front of everyone. But it was more about it
hmm
tells more about the other kids than it tells about myself because in my at home I was always I was always extroverted and I
yeah.
did theater classes and surf lessons. I wasn't very good at it, but I love this performing stuff as a kid.
Wow. You really are kind of setting the stage for this perfect mismatch of of characteristics that I actually think do quite well in fundraising. But before we get there, I kind of want to bridge the gap because at some point you took
But
all
you
this
know,
background information and go ahead.
sorry, I wasn't very, and I'm not very self confident.
Oh, sorry.
So that's something that's very important for fundraising
Mm,
that I didn't have.
okay, so that is a good element to find out, and then maybe we'll touch on how you found that later. But before we get to Purple Metrics and the venture-backed startup that you run now, tell me a little bit more about coming out of school and entering the professional world. I happen to know that you've been an entrepreneur for a while. Tell me about your transition into the world of working and how you got to entrepreneurship.
So I think I've always been an entrepreneur, but I didn't know it because you see, there was this apartment like in my family, uh, and I decided to put it on Airbnb in like 2014 because it would be better than just renting it for someone. And I started a YouTube channel. So I always produced content in English about Rio because no one was doing it in 2015, 2016 because we were hosting the Olympics. So
Wow.
I always had in me this let's do something new, and I organize a bunch of stuff at school because we didn't have. So I changed a few rules there and nothing very major important, but I always had these characteristics of like personality traits. And then I went into a traditional career. Uh, and that's something very funny that my nickname in my first job was CEO. People would like, they called me, oh, the CEO is coming. I would organize everyone and the projects. But I had the traditional career through like from when like for probably 8 years. And at some point, I realized that we didn't have an in branding. And I realized startups needed branding, but they weren't doing it because there wasn't a supplier, there wasn't a company that could do it in a way that would fit their needs. So I started doing this alongside as a part time, as a second journey, uh, and it became so. I mean, I would cry like going back home because I had so much things to do because I was doing like brand gym, my first company, at the same time that I was working in a large advertising agency with all the things that you imagine when you think of
Mm,
advertising, like long hours and things like that. So I would wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. to work in the projects of the startups, and then I would go and work until 9 p.m. And then I would just had to get home to sleep, and then I would work weekends. And then I totally couldn't handle both, like working. I was doing the Olympics, like international projects for Coca-Cola, the Olympics, and then the startups. I couldn't like live this double journey. And then my dad said to me, like, I think you need to focus entirely. And then just a little background on my dad. He works for the government. Uh, he
mhm.
he is a director of a museum, and my brother, who is now my co-founder, is a developer. And he, for like 5 or 6 years, would say, "Look, what are you doing in technology? I mean, you should have a stable job. You should quit and go work like with a petrol company, something like that." So he's very
Right.
conservative in terms of career. And at some point, he said, "Look, I think you've already decided. You're just afraid to reach, like to jump." And then that's when I realized if it's so obvious to him that he's very
Yeah.
conservative in terms of career, it's obvious. Like I'm just resisting. So and then I say that brain gym picked me and not the opposite way because I resisted as long as I could.
Right.
Because I was afraid. I didn't know. I
Well,
didn't know. I
I think
didn't see
that
myself.
yeah, I think this we'll see, but this might be a theme which I really love. So, there are stories of people becoming entrepreneurs where the story that's told is like, I'm working a corporate job and I just said, "Fuck it. Like, this is not me. I'm going to like put all my chips on the table and just go out in the world and try to start my own company, which is a path that happens. But I sort of loved hearing this story, which was like, look, I had my main thing and I was working and I was working, and it wasn't until like the opportunity really pulled you in, where it was like it needed you to go that way, that you decided, that's when I'm going to kick this off. That's when I'm going to go full time on
Yeah,
Brand Gym. And I don't want to like marginalize or not tell the full Brand Gym story, but you ended up growing Brand Gym to an impressive
yeah,
size, many clients. Um, and at some point, this kind of led you to the next company that you wanted to start. So tell me a little bit about the insight that you had while at Brand Gym that made you want to work on Purple
perfect.
Metrics. And, if you thought about like how you thought about that company in the beginning. Was it just another company? Was it, I
No,
want to raise
yeah,
venture capital? Did you know what venture capital was? Yeah.
I knew because I was working with startups and tech companies and very close to the
With startups, right?
to the VC, to the VC funds. So I was really already understanding tech a lot. And what happened is I wanted to do something more like a product and more recurrent, but I didn't know if it would be tech based or not. But then again, I followed the pain because that's my style, and I know it's beautiful to say, "Oh, you should follow the pain." But what happens is that usually founders they follow the business, right? So there's this market size and an opportunity. No one's doing that, and that's the value that we can capture. And it's very, I think it's easier to pitch investors in that way. My way is like, why is no one measuring it? So it's the same thing with branding was why aren't they doing branding? I mean, they are launching a company. They need to, so it's, so I was working with tech companies that measure everything, very data driven. And I started my career as a performance marketer, as a growth marketer in 2008. So I understand numbers a lot and how media works and so on. So I would have this sit down and have this conversation with founders that would be, all right, so why are you doing branding? And they would go, because my CAC is super high, or I have this churn that I don't know why it's happening, or I can't reach the right audience, or they don't are not buying to this price point. So it would be very tangible outcomes that we would look for. And I started pursuing it, and we started to see the results. So CAC drop would be like every time and stuff like that, because obviously it's well positioned, people understand what the brand is, and oh, it's for me, so I will buy it. And so we started to see the results, and I was started to people would ask me, how can we measure branding? And my answer would go from, well, we really can't, it's subjective. And I started to think about it a lot because people were asking me this a lot, and then I started realize, wait, why is that so? And then now, not very, in the first time I started a company, it was more like an impulse, and now it was more like, oh my god, why is no one solving this problem? And then I started to look into it, and I
Mm.
saw it's a problem all across the world. So I started talking to marketers. I talked to people in Australia, in Israel, in the UK, in the US, in Mexico, in Argentina. They all said, I don't know a way to measure it. And I really need, because I having my budget cut, because I can't measure the impact and I can't make decisions. And I was like, oh my God, it's not a Brazilian problem. Why is no one solving it? Maybe it's impossible. So I started looking into it, and I realized maybe because I have this unique background, no one knows math and branding. Brand people, they go into branding because they don't like logical thinking. So it's all about the concept and creative. Maybe no one really
Right.
put this together. I don't know. Uh, and then I started to look a little bit at numbers and so on. And then I decided it should be pure SaaS, all software like Amazon and CS in the cogs, and that's it. And now open
Yep.
AI, and that's it.
Yep.
Uh, and then I raised money from angels. So from the start, I knew, but I thought it would be something within the old company, and it would be a service, like we would do service and measure it. So it started as a different company within a holding, the same group, but investors, they
Yeah.
put money in the tech company. And then right after we launched, we realized it's two separate companies and we split it, spun off Purple Metrics, and I left Brand Gym. And after
Awesome.
like half a year later, I sold it, uh, truly exited.
Got it. Okay. That's a great background. No, that's a great background, and awesome that you got your first exit while you're going into your next company, which is
During
fun.
the almost during the
th-
fundraising.
yeah. You kind of touch on something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't know where this will go, but I kind of want to hear a little bit more about it. So you were like, I actually started the company, knew it was going to be a software company, knew I needed
Hmm.
some money in order to build it up first because it's, software,
Hmm.
software forward. And then you just said, and so I raised from angels. Tell me a little bit about, we don't have to go through the full angel fundraise. But my guess is, I guess, working with startups and venture capital firms, you happen to know some people in the game
Hmm.
who would want to back you. Like, where were you able to get angel funding from in the beginning?
Nice. Yeah, that's a great question. So, my friends and family, uh, I don't come from a poor family, but it's either not a rich family. They couldn't give me money. Neither my friends from school or college. So I didn't have this natural backwards background to go to. But on the other side, I was working with nice people and nice founders, and they were
Yeah.
feeling the pain. They were the ones asking me, "How can we measure?" And so there was this one angel, and I have worked with a couple companies from his portfolio, and he's the first angel of um, a few software companies here that had these big exits and so on. And he's a psychologist, so he understands people. And then he became an investor, so he always also have this mixed background, which is very similar to mine. Not very similar, but in terms of feeling the two sides. And at some point, he looked at me and said, "Do you think of becoming an entrepreneur?" And I said, like, because in Portuguese there is a verb like, "Do you think of entrepreneuring?" And I said, "You mean like again?" And he said, "Oh, no, no, I mean for real." And I said, "But Brand Gym is for real." And I make fun of him ever since. Like,
Right.
so I texted him
Oh,
like,
wow. Wow.
I texted him like, "I'm thinking of doing it for real now." And he started laughing. Um, so I built very close, very close to him. Uh, First, I had to get a co-founder, which is my brother. So when he was on board, I called him. I was already doing this Zoom calls with him. So I have talked to him like a couple times, and he had shown interest before. Like, when you decide to do it for real, let me know.
It's always cool to hear founders talking about the angels they met early on that ended up turning into long-lasting relationships. There's nothing like having someone believe in you wholeheartedly, enough that they're willing to pour their own money into whatever it is you do along your entrepreneurial journey. There's a reason they call them angels. After the break, Guta shares what it was like going out to raise institutional capital for the very first time. Like many of you, my last venture-backed startup was a SaaS business. In that company early on, we had the opportunity to sell into a large enterprise, but ran into some walls when they asked us if we were SOC 2 certified. Not only were we not certified, we also found out that it would take our small team a ton of time to get that done, and so we ended up abandoning the deal. If you haven't run into a situation like that where a potential customer or investor is asking if you're SOC 2, HIPAA, GDPR, or ISO 27001 certified, you probably will soon. But unlike me, you could use a company called Vanta to help. Vanta helps automate up to 90% of the compliance work, getting you audit ready in weeks rather than months, and eliminating up to 85% of the costs. Not only that, but Vanta can start small with you and scale up as you grow, helping you land bigger deals and earn customer trust. The best part is Vanta is offering funded listeners $1,000 off for going to vanta.com/funded. That's VANTA.com/funded for $1,000 off your service. Check it out.
Um, so after I got a co-founder, I looked at him and said, "Look, I think that's it." And he said, "Yeah, sure. Let me know when you are ready." And I said, "Oh, I'm ready." And he said, "All right, you need a business plan." I said, "I have one." And then I said, "Well, will you put money in it?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Do you want to lead an angel round?" And he said, "Yeah." So, I mean, I know it sounds
Awesome.
easy. It wasn't, because it was built over time. And then I went after other founders and like C-levels of tech companies
Sure.
that I have worked
So
with.
here's the thing that we're going to use this as a jump off point to talk about is I know it wasn't super easy, right? Like, because you did have to get your co-founder in, you did have to work on it. You did have to have these conversations, but you did have the advantage of having this amazing relationship with an investor angel who just believed in you and trusted you.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of this person that was ready to back you and then probably created the momentum that allowed you to add on a few other people for this angel round. And it wasn't necessarily easy, but it also wasn't a full grind. And one of the things that I tell people is that a lot of times when you have an advantage early on, like a great relationship with an angel, or you were in YC and raised around out of YC, or you come from a really rich family, these are all advantages that allow you to raise an initial early stage round of capital, but it can actually kind of impact the way you think about what it's going to be like the next time you go out and
Mm-hmm.
raise. And
True.
you might think that it'll kind of happen the same way. And so, what I wanted to ask you or have you talk a little bit more about is what was the point where you were like, okay, got this angel money in, I'm building some stuff, now I think I wanna or need to go raise another round of capital. What was the trigger point for that, and how were you thinking about, how you'd approach fundraising then?
Um, yeah, what happened is that our money ended in mm, April 2022. Not the best time to fundraise. And
Rough.
since I was very good in two things, which is bootstrapping a company and raising from angels, I decided to go raise from angels again. So I had this angel bridge round, or whatever you would like to call it. So I took more money from angels. I talked to a few funds, but I'm not even sure I started an institutional fundraise because the market was super close. They weren't putting money into companies. So I raised more from angels, and then I realized like that I don't know how to raise capital. I didn't know. Uh, so what happened is that obviously it was April 22, and obviously I could have told myself that, oh, it's the market and the macro environment. But I realized, talking to a few funds back then, that they wouldn't do it anyways. They weren't gonna do it. And but I knew because I'm building this. I'm kind of an influencer. I'm building this very close to marketers. I know there's a pain, and I know no one is solving it, and I know it's big because every company in the world potentially needs to measure this. So I knew, and they weren't seeing it. And I was like, why? What am I doing wrong? And then I did what I always do. I went to study it. So, so I had this second chance because I raised again from angels and the market, and I had this perfect excuse that the market is very bad right now, so it's not my fault. And then I can go back in a year after and try again, and that's what I did.
I love that.
I love the fact that you did realize that you were good at raising from angels, but then you had this instinct that like something is different about the way you have to raise from institutional funds.
Yeah.
And we'll sort of fast forward. I mean, you talk about having an excuse about like, we're not raising now because the market is bad. You went out and raised in not much better of a market. So like you really had to be on your game. But at the same time, I know it must have been quite painful at times. Do you remember any of the worst experiences while fundraising for this last round, and any stories that stand out of like something that happened that was like like
No, it was the
so like a,
hardest.
a punch to the gut,
Yeah, it's the
anything like that?
hardest thing I've done in my life, for sure. I mean, for sure. I mean, it's harder than I never. I have this luck of being. School wasn't very difficult for me, and nor passing on like hiring processes and stuff like that. I never had like a really to do something really difficult, and this was really difficult for the first time in my life. Uh, and I went to the best college, best university in Latin America. I mean, it's not that I haven't tried; it's that it wasn't difficult before, and this was very, very difficult for me. Um, I think the worst part is receiving, because I had all these great relationships with people from the industry because I've been working with them for 5 or 6 years, and so people that I admire and that I really
Mhm.
respect and that I trust in terms of business, and they would say, "Look, I don't think you can grow an international company because I don't think you have it in you," or "I think you're targeting the wrong audience. Your MRR is low and it will keep being low because you're selling this at $10,000 a year and you could be selling it at $100,000 a year if you are targeting enterprises." And I would say, "Look, but I won't learn as much because there are a few enterprises. I want to spend a year selling to them. I won't get feedback fast enough. I don't care about the MRR. I need to like improve the product." And I go, "Yeah, that's not the right way to build a startup." And it's people I do respect, and I like them, and people just saying what happened. What happened is that I remember sending you this text message. Everyone, because people were waiting to fundraise because the market was very uh, shaky, and so everyone went raising by Q2 of 23. So we had all these MRRs competing for funding. So you had companies with 20K MRR or 200K MRR. So investors were a bit lost on valuation and stuff like that. So I had like no's that were just like, we are putting money into a company with a higher MRR because we can. They actually sent this email because we can. And well, we decided to. So, but we love you. Uh, and then so hearing all these no's from people that I truly, they're investors that I looked at and I said, I don't respect this person. I don't want them to be my associate. I don't want to be associated with them. But the good ones hurt.
Yeah, like it feels really bad when someone you respect says no or says that your baby is ugly, right? Like that really hurts.
Yeah.
And I know that you went through a period of time where you were getting lots of no's and nobody wanted to invest. So where I'd like to kind of bring you to is, do you remember the moment when things started shifting? In particular, an awesome firm in Brazil ended up leading your round, Astella,
Hmm.
and at some point they reached out to you and said, "You know what? We want to do this." Do you remember where you were? Do you remember when you got the note that like this was actually going to happen?
Yeah. But it wasn't as simple as that. So the partner that led the deal on their side was on vacation when I started raising.
Right.
So he was on vacation, and then I talked to him 3 or 4 weeks after I was already fundraising. So I was trained, and things were going good with a couple of firms that I liked that I like. I do like. I can still like. I would still have them on my cap table, and so I was very relaxed, and we went for coffee, and I had no expectations because he understands a lot of marketing about marketing. He's an advertiser, and he wasn't very excited about Purple Metrics when I started it. He was like, "Look, you have a real company that has profit. I mean, you can live out of it. Why are you leaving this company to build a software company? Do you know how hard it is?" So he wasn't very excited about Purple Metrics. So I wasn't really counting on him because he really got it. Like, and I went, well, all right, let's talk to him. But I have done a bunch of stuff. Like, I have a few angels that are LPs of the fund that were talking about me with him already and stuff like that. And we went for coffee, and it was like a match like no other. So he got it, and he got in a way that he said, like, but look, if that's the vision, and I agree, the next move is this one. Like, I mean, and we would complement each other, and I started changing the business plan from his input, and then yeah, so that's I kind of knew back then that like that it would happen. I had this feeling that it would happen, but obviously a lot of anxiety because nothing was really set in stone. But then I met his they work in doubles, like in partners. So I met the other person, and she's great, and we like also had a great talk.
Yep.
And then I pitched the entire fund on a Monday, and then on a Thursday, my main angel, the one that I talked about, he's an LP in the fund, like a relevant LP in their fund. And he said, I'm hosting a lunch uh, to the LPs of the fund of Astella. Come by. And so I went there, and then the partner looked at me and like gave like, yeah, it's gonna happen. He's like said to me like it's happening. And I was like, and I was like, all right,
Thumbs up.
thumbs up, like it's happening. And I said, cool, nice, I'm happy. And he said, me too.
What was the feeling?
Yeah, it
When you
was a
saw
bit,
him and gave you the thumbs up, like,
but then it took like a month or a month and a half until we got a term sheet. So it was like it was a shaky, emotionally shaky process, but it was like cool. Like I don't know, the feeling is I didn't want to celebrate because until money's in the bank, we didn't even have a term sheet, so it was far from like a real fundraise. But and I remember you telling me like those are good signs, but don't really believe in it. So I was mentally trying to convince myself that this wasn't happening. So I didn't like become super happy because I was holding myself because to keep focused on finishing the fundraise. But I mean, it was a bit
yeah,
of a relief mixed with happiness because I really like them, and I think it's the best investor for us. I genuinely believe it.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I hope people see part of this video because, like, I love asking the question about the feeling and remembering where you were when you got the note or the word or talked to them and you knew something was going to happen. And I don't think anyone will ever forget their first yes, like their first main fundraise and it
Uh-huh.
actually happening. I like remember it so well because when I looked at your face, you're kind of like ear to ear smile, looking off to the side. And it's just like you're tapping into those really positive feelings, which, don't last very long because obviously then it goes into now we need to execute. Now we need to actually, um, do the things that we said we were going to do. But that moment of pure joy of getting past the excruciating pain of fundraising and into the promised land is such a unique one. I wonder if you could continue on. And, I said there was 6 months of you talking to people, talking to investors that you really respected, everyone saying no. And you're finally able to get this awesome firm Astella to say
No,
yes.
I know. I feel saying no and I feel ghosting me.
Yeah, yeah. So then tell us what happened after you signed the term sheet. Like, is it all the
uh,
same? People are still saying no. What was the shift
oh
like?
no, then after it, everyone wants to invest, obviously. But then, I mean, they were the first ones. Yeah, so I started fundraised
Yeah.
the very day Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt. And
Crazy.
so then I
Good
did.
timing, Guda.
Yeah,
Great
I always
timing.
have the best timing. And then it took like, I delayed it for a couple of weeks. Then it were like 2 or 3 months until the term sheet. Yes, because it was April, and then the term sheet came on Valentine's Day in Brazil, which is June 12th. And then it took like a couple of weeks of negotiating the terms, because they were traumatized. Not traumatized is a strong word, but they said, look, we have some bad experiences with discussing side
Yeah.
letters, because side letters is when it should
Mhm.
be all bureaucratic, and then we go back into discussing, and it's very heavy emotionally for us and for founders. So we'd really like to test with you this. Let's like, my term sheet was almost like a side letter. It was so like everything was there, like on the detail. So it was a couple of weeks, because we also decided to flip the company. We weren't sure we were flipping it to Delaware and Cayman, to offshore structure. Um, and then so it was a couple of weeks, and then we signed the what is
The terms.
yeah no yeah, then we signed the term
Yeah.
sheet, and then we started and then we started the due diligence that took so long, like a month and a half maybe, and we were flipping the company, which also takes like a couple of months. So it were like another like fundraising.
Yeah.
So the yes came in the middle of the process. It took almost double the time. And
Wow.
then, and I remember like you texting me like, have you signed yet? I was like, no. I wonder
Yeah.
who will ever sign this
Yeah.
thing. And then I signed it. I was at the Saster event in Silicon Valley. We signed it. And that Friday,
It's amazing.
the safe with the side letter, and then we went to this Brax happy hour, and all the VCs were there, and obviously, like I told them, like off the records, just signed the safe. So there were all these founders and VCs, and we
Yeah.
kind of like I got drunk together with them. Basically, that's what happened.
Well, I mean, the thing that I'll underline is you're the first interview that I've done with someone raising in the middle of the worst fundraising environment in the history of venture capital to have like actually walked through with me.
Really?
And I mean, I'm very proud of you. Yeah, I'm very proud of you. I know it was incredibly difficult, and so getting to this point has to feel great, and you fully deserve it. You know, though the thing that I'll end with is I always like to ask people about their companies and funny elements of their company. So you're measuring branding, you're measuring advertising. Um, have there been any like crazy campaigns or weird things that you've worked in, either uh, funny industries or
Mm.
just in your work in branding? Would love to hear anything. That's
One story which is funny, and I think it's not what you asked, but it's funnier. That is the first, so Purple Metrics is a research widget. You can answer questions, and then the user can type an answer. Like we ask, why did you say it? And then they can answer wherever they want. And the very like one of the very first comments that the user left on the platform is, someone is not busy. Who is the unoccupied person that made up this research?
well, that's one way to use it.
Yeah, well, but I do have a question for you.
Awesome.
Uh,
Yeah.
do you remember that I sent you our deck, and then you commented on it, and then I sent it back to you, and you said it's a great deck. Can I use it as an example for like in my workshops? And I said like, yeah, sure. After we raised, but then I was thinking after, a little bit later, did you really think that it was a great deck, or were you just trying to make me feel confident?
That should have been what I did as a good coach. I should have like tricked you into no, this is what I think was great about it. It's the before and after.
Mm,
So the progress you made from where I saw you in the very beginning and where you were able to get the deck, you might have iterated on the deck after you sent me that version too,
sure, yeah.
but you did make a huge difference. There was a huge difference in what you started with in Purple Metrics and where the story ended up at, which was just like night and day to me. So I thought you
Nice.
did great.
Cool.
That was my conversation with Guta Tolmasquim, founder and CEO of Purple Metrics, the top branding measurement software company on the market. Let this be a reminder that a fundraise starts way before you go out to raise. For Guta, it was the relationship she had built early on that ended up being the very thing that allowed her to push her pre-seed to a close. After the break, I'll be sitting with my producer, Paige, and I'm excited to hear what she noticed in this episode. If you're a crazy busy entrepreneur like me, I know one thing's certain: you have too much to do. Of course, you'd love to hire someone else to help, but I bet you think you can't afford it. It turns out you can, especially if you use a recruiting firm called Agent, like I have in recruiting my last 4 team members. Agent specializes in recruiting overseas talent. Now, I know what you're thinking, not another virtual assistant hiring agency. Yes, they can help you hire assistants, but they can also help you hire skilled talent like marketers, designers, and even engineers at a fraction of the cost. Now, if you're looking to add more leverage to your team, check out fundedpod.com/agent. That's AGENT to add your next team member. You can thank me later. Hey, Paige, how are you doing?
A little tired because we're recording this on a Monday, but besides that, feeling pretty good.
Yeah, Mondays are always like a little bit exciting, but also like me tiring because I know how much there is to get done. But I'm glad to be doing this.
Me too, because this was a fun episode. Like, I think Guda has an interesting perspective. This is something I was thinking about. How she started Brand Gym, which was her first company, and she bootstrapped that. I know she had angel investments and whatnot, but that was a bootstrapped company. And then she realized, I can't I can't make Brand Gym venture backed, but I think there's an opportunity to create some sort of software in the same vicinity that could be venture backed. So I think this is like a cool perspective and story we've seen and are going to see with where she takes Purple Metrics, where now she's experiencing the opposite of like what it takes to scale a company with venture dollars and all that goes into that. And not to mention she raised it during 2023. This cracked me up, the fact that she started her fundraise on the day that SVB crashed.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
can't.
those type of stories just blow my mind because I think you and I at this point both know how hard it is to fundraise. So if you layer on top weird, crazy black swan events like SVB crashing, it's like, wow, that was not super fun.
That puts a damper on the conversation just a little bit when you're going out to meet with people.
Yeah, totally.
But she did have there was something I wanted to talk about, which is this dynamic she had with this one angel investor
Mhm.
throughout her, entrepreneurship career, and how he had invested in Brand Gym and he had basically kind of told her like, "Hey, anything you do, I'm going to support." And I want to hear your thoughts on that because I think that's really interesting and something kind of rare but amazing that you see with angel investors that can be like, what do you call them? A strategic. Maybe you can, how about we start with that? What's a
Yeah.
strategic angel investor?
Look, I mean, I don't think there's a Webster's dictionary definition of what a strategic angel is, but I mean, you can think about the term angel investor as just someone who is sent from the heavens to help you in maybe one of the hardest times of getting a company off the ground where you need that initial capital. And they certainly are
Yeah.
angels to help you like that. And I think that part of the definition is just like money, right?
Hmm.
Strategic, when you add the word strategic, it probably means that there is additional value to your business, right? So it might be if you are in the real estate industry doing real estate tech, a strategic angel would be bringing
Oh,
capital, but also
insight, strategy, relationships around real estate. It
Okay.
could mean someone who is strategic within fundraising overall because they just have a huge network within fundraising. I think it's a pretty broad term that just means additional value outside of the dollars that they're putting in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I, like, was kind of thinking it was something else or it had more specificity to it, but that makes sense. It's basically just like a godsend investor that's
Yeah.
like, which is kind of what Gouda had, which I found so fascinating. Like, he was like, "Whatever you do, I'm gonna invest in,"
Yeah. I
which
mean,
is insane.
that type of angel isn't as rare as you might think. Certainly it's
Mm,
they don't grow on trees, but I think those type of angels might be the more sophisticated um, of angels where they kind of know it's like, I was lucky enough to have angels like that where
mm,
they might not believe that the thing that they're backing this time is going to be the thing, but they're like, we know that this person, this entrepreneur has something special in them across
yeah.
the whole arc of their career. And I want to back them now because if I back them now, then that gives me a front row seat to see the next couple of things that they do. And they know that their investment is a bit more of an investment in your total career. So,
Mm,
I could see that angel being like, I think Gouda is special. Brand Gym, it might not be the thing that returns 1,000x on my money.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
But if I think about this check bundled in with the check for the next company that she does, and then I blend all the returns over that, it's going to be a great investment. And of course, if for me, and just thinking about me, the people that back me in my other companies, they 100% have an opportunity to invest in me in the
Yeah.
future in anything I do because of the support they showed me. And I think the same thing happened with Gouda and the angel that you're thinking about.
Yeah, and it was interesting because for Purple Metrics, she ended up having to raise a decent amount of, well, she first off, she wanted to raise a decent amount of angel funding. And then she talked about how she had tried to go out and raise when the market was really shitty and she didn't have any luck. So she came back in a year and tried again. And she utilized angel investing a lot throughout that time. And I kind of want to dive into this topic that I think keeps popping up within, this pre-seed, like early stage company. This lean towards utilizing angel funds more. Like, I kind of want to get your opinion on this. Like, what's your opinion of, you know, angel party round or angel money round, a big round with angels versus pre-seed funding? Like,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that in this current market?
Well, I'd say like even before this market started evolving into what it is today, I've always been a fan of bringing on angels as a lead into a bigger round.
Mm,
Because angels a lot of time will make decisions based on their relationships, the vibes of a founder. It's much
yeah.
easier to convince an individual angel to jump on board, much easier than it is to convince a venture capital firm from a cold start to invest. And so bringing on an angel early on can start the momentum train and credibility of, yes, I got Paige Randall to invest. Wow, Paige is investing. If I got
Mm,
Paige to invest, maybe I can get Jonathan Lee to invest. And if I have Paige and Jonathan invested, well, then maybe this venture capital firm, when they hear about what's happening, they'll realize like, it's not just my feelings about this company. There are other credible people that think it's
mm,
interesting. So that flow and strategy works in any market. I think what you're referencing now is something that we've discussed internally, that I've talked to our friends at Carta about, which is this idea that I believe the pre-seed round is very challenging right now. And the bar to raise a seed round is so high. So there's this weird middle ground of when a company starts and a company starts growing before it gets real revenue traction. If you need capital to build the company and build the product that will get you to that revenue traction that seed investors are requiring now, what happens that middle ground? Especially as pre-seed investors are like we are tending to say that they don't actually love investing in zero revenue businesses anymore.
yeah.
So depending on what business you run and how much software you need to build ahead of time, how much needs to go in before you can actually start landing revenue,
The idea that you might need to raise more angel capital today than previously is something that I want everyone to consider. So I think Guta saw it early on. She had the network
Yeah.
to raise from angels, and it's something that I think will continue on for the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I also think, and she touched on this a little bit too. I kind of like this dynamic of an angel bridge round. I don't know if I know everything about it, but I'm assuming it sounds like it's when you start to get traction from a lot of angels and a decent amount of money's piling in, and then that makes another VC fund, maybe like a pre-seed fund, want to lead the round or something like that. Is it possible for an angel to lead around? Like, I have so many questions around this. I have
Yeah,
no.
it's a good question. This idea of what does it mean to lead around. Again, I don't think there's a formal definition around what it means to lead. Uh,
Yeah.
Technically, you could say, "Oh, this angel has led the round," and that might mean, if we use that terminology, we that might mean that you had an angel set the valuation. It might
Oh.
mean that the angel has a big check in there. It might mean a couple things, like the angel is taking a board seat. But in general, I would say to be a lead that other potential investors respect as a lead, you would
Mm.
have to certainly set the valuation. That's easy to do. Anyone could do that, right? You don't even have to put money to quote unquote necessarily
Yeah.
set a
Yeah.
valuation. But they'd want the amount of capital invested to be meaningful and like a meaningful portion of the round. Usually lead investors take over more than half, at least half of the round, the full round.
Okay.
There are times when a lead investor could technically be less than 50% of the company. But again, it's much more about, whether or not you're a lead is the more important thing about being a lead is that the other potential investors respect the idea that
Mm.
you are a lead. It's a
Ah.
bit ambiguous, but I'm saying, like, I guess what I'm saying is if Mark Zuckerberg came in and wanted to invest $500,000 in a $2.5 million pre-seed round for a social startup, that founder could probably say, you know what, Mark
Yeah.
Zuckerberg is leading the round. He helped me set my valuation and he's putting $500,000 in. That's not half of a
That looks pretty good.
$200 million. It looks pretty good, and everyone around the table is going to be like, "Okay, yeah, that feels like a real lead," you know. Whereas
Yeah.
if my sister, that's a bad example because I think she probably is fairly influential in certain circles. If if my cousin, who's not in tech, decides to invest $25,000 into a round, I couldn't go to everyone else and say like, "Oh, my cousin's leading the round." No one would respect that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Oh my gosh, there's so much, like, we could have a whole episode dedicated to me asking you questions about angel rounds because I find them absolutely
And
fascinating.
by the way,
But I did wanna.
I'll point out the fact that as we were getting into the recording, you were like, "I think I know all the answers, so it's going to be weird.
Yeah,
I don't know if I have any questions."
I don't know anything, I'm
No, no, there are
realizing.
always more questions to ask, Paige.
Oh, thank God, because we gotta fill up these debriefs somehow. So thank God I still have endless amount of questions, it seems. Like, there's always, you think you know something, and then you are like, "Oh, wait, there's, like, a
Paige,
whole other
I'm
chapter to
always
this."
learning, right? I'm always
Yeah,
asking questions, so
yeah,
I think we can fill up these debriefs.
yeah. Estella.
Yeah,
Estella was the lead, and they're a well-known, venture firm in Brazil. And something I found very cool was that a few of her angel investors, I'm not sure if they were angel investors from Brand Gym or from Purple Metrics, they were LPs in Estella, like at Estella.
yep,
And so they had a little bit of influence over there of like kind of trying to get her in, which originally, the investor that was trying to, like, carry the round wasn't interested at all in Purple Metrics she was talking
right.
about. She was like, I just was like, "Whatever, I'll meet him," and it ended up being an amazing match. But I wanted to go back to the topic of, like, these angel investors being LPs. Is that something that you see? Or maybe that's not the right question I'm trying to ask. I guess the point I'm trying to make, maybe it's not even a question, is that sounds like an amazing way to like build your network, like
Yeah.
is to meet angel investors that are LPs at venture firms as well. If they genuinely believe in you and think you're an amazing founder, that could help you a ton down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think you in this episode, in this conversation with Guta and looking at her fundraise, we identified that she had an angel that had incredible influence over a
Yeah.
venture capital firm because they were investors in the venture capital firm. And certainly, if you can find angel investors who are LPs in your favorite venture capital firms that you might want to raise from in the future, that's great. But no one needs to work backwards from that very specific requirement page. I
Yeah.
think the general concept is that if you take money from people who are in the ecosystem, that is going to expand your network and your ability to get in touch with, in a credible way, VCs who might invest in you. And that might be a second degree connection through an LP, but it might be
Mhm.
a third degree, as in your your um, your angel investor is friends with an LP in the venture capital firm that you want to
Yeah.
invest in. And so that itself could be influential because you could ask your
Mhm.
angel, hey, it looks like you're friends with Paige and she is an LP in Adamant Ventures. Maybe you mentioned to her that she should look at, that firm should look at our company. That itself is influential. And so that's more of the takeaway that I'd like founders to get out there, which is that
Yeah.
angel investors with a very small check can be extremely influential in the way you approach fundraising.
Yeah. That reminds me of what we just hosted that panel for some founders who raised angel rounds, and Shannon, the founder of Esker Beauty, was talking about how she just wanted this one person on her, like on her cap table so bad for barely any money. Like she was like, I could care less if it's $2,000. I wanted this person because they're an amazing asset and value add to
Mhm.
me. And I think that is something cool to think about. Like, it's not always about the amount, like you just said. It's about how can, like, number one, do they genuinely believe in me? And number two, is there some strategy here that they want to help me like connect with the right people, or they want to help me in some way, and believe in what I'm doing? I think that's the most important part. And I think Guta did an amazing job at utilizing her network and creating this round through this network she built over years and years and years. So
Yeah.
kudos to her.
Yeah. I
Kudos to
think
her.
the takeaway of all of this is don't sleep on angels. Yeah. There are all sorts of ways to bring on investors, and the smaller checks might not be smaller amounts of value overall, right?
We'll
Great
end it
stuff.
there. That's
Yeah,
great.
I think that's the debrief.
That's the debrief.
If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our newsletter. It's at fundedpod.com/newsletter. And find me on social. I'm at Jayeh, that's JAYYEH, on almost every platform. I respond to DMs and newsletter replies, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey, everyone.
And as always, one last thanks to our sponsor, Vanta, the leading automated security and compliance platform.